So at first, what do we have? Simply a div that contains 8 children. So we decided to give this a custom class of container, simply because it makes sense, because its role is to be a container. You could have named it pizza, it doesn't change anything. Same here, we decided to add a class of item. So let's create these two classes. So we want a custom class, so we add a dot. Don't forget the dot. So it's a custom class named container. And at first, what do we want? We want a width of 100 view width, so it occupies all the viewport width. Same thing for the height, 100 view height. And to see this clearly, let's add, while we develop, a 4 pixel solid black border. There, you can see. Now, same thing for the items. So let's create a class of item, and we'll give them a border of 2 pixels solid green. So now you can see what you've got. So now we want it to be a grid of, let's say, 4 items. So we will simply create a grid by using the display property, and this time instead of the usual flex we will use grid. And immediately you can see now that if you go to the developer tool, simply by right-clicking, inspecting, you can see that now you have this grid. And you can see that now this grid has just 1 column and 8 rows. So let's say that we want 4 columns of equal size. You can go into your container and use the grid template columns attribute and say, okay, I want 4 columns of 1 fractional unit each, meaning they would have the same size. So now you can see you have 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. You could also have other kind of units. You could, for example, have, let's say, 100 pixels for this one, and the other ones would share the rest by dividing by 3. Or you can even have, this is common, to have 2 fixed columns and let the other ones just share what is available. So it's 50% what is available, 50% what is available. But let's go back to just 4 columns. But you can see it may be hard to read, so you can use the repeat function and say, yeah, I want 4 columns of 1 FR. So it's exactly the same, but it's easier to read. Now what is really interesting with the grids is that you can easily occupy several columns. Do this one. If you wanted this one to occupy the space of 2 columns, you could say, okay, I want to pick the items. From the items, I just want to have the first child, so the nth child 1. And you could say, okay, I want this one to have a grid column of span 2. And you see immediately you have this one that spans 2 columns. It pushes the last one, so another row is automatically created for you. Could you do the same for rows? No problem. Let's say you want this item with the 3 inside it to span 2 rows, so this row and this one. So you would simply go for the item with an nth child of 3. And you would say, okay, we want this grid row to span 2. And now you see you have, so you see that's why with grids you really have this 2-dimension feel. And you can also say, for example, for this one, the first one, instead of span 2, you could say, okay, I want it to go from column 1 till column 3. And it would be the same. And why is it 3 and not 2? We'll see these together. You simply have to display the grid, and you can see that you have lines. You see, it's like in a swimming pool when you have swimming lines. So this column goes from line 1 to line 2, and this one goes from line 2 to line 3. That's why you go from line 1 to line 3. And if you want to go to occupy all the columns, so the 4 columns, you could go either from 1 to 5 or from 1 till -1. Same result. What you will often do is use flex you see, to decide how the whole page looks like, and use then inside it for each item you might use Flexbox. So for example, if you wanted to center everything horizontally and vertically, what would you do then? You would decide that this item would display flex, would justify content of center. So now you can see that everything is centered. You see there. And then for justify content, align items, you want to center it also on the cross axis, and you see now it's centered. So you can use Flexbox and the grid together, and this is often what you're gonna do. Another important thing is, you see, if you, this is what I wanted to do. So you see, it's at some point it can be hard to read. So what you could do is to use media query and decide to go from the grid presentation to flex presentation when you reach, let's see what we have. Let's say that when it's below, let's go for 560 pixel. So you could create a media query here and say that would test if your screen has a maximum width, so it is less than what did we say? It was 556 pixel, if I remember well. You want your container to no more display grid, but to display flex instead. And you would want its flex direction to be column instead of the default of row, just like that. And you could decide that each item should have a flex basis, so a minimum size of 100 pixel, for example. So you see now on small screens like smartphones, you could have a presentation of Flexbox on the column, and on a bigger screen you would have the grid. So all this is very powerful. Tell me in the comments if you want to see another example using images and other things like this, but now you have the basics of grid, and I hope you can see why the grid is more powerful, because it really uses 2 dimension, and yes, you see, to display things just as in a magazine page.